Hi, my name is Misha and I'm writing a book. Today, I kind of wanted to continue on with a sort of series that I have on how different aspects of my life shape my writing. I did a video on how music shapes my writing. I talked a little bit about how dreams shape my writing in another video. I'll link both of those below. And today I really wanted to speak a little bit about how language shapes my writing, specifically knowing two different languages and growing up learning two different languages at once, and how both of those have factored into both how I experience the world, how I perceive the world, how I understand the world, and also how I've used writing to sort of bridge both of these worlds together in some ways. I was born in Pakistan and I was really young when my family and I immigrated to Canada. And so I grew up, especially within my own home, speaking Urdu, and my family speaks Urdu to me. I speak Urdu back. Now I think I speak a mixture of English and Urdu with them, especially over time being in a predominantly English-speaking country. I mostly speak English, except when I'm speaking with family. And even then, it's a bit of both. And sometimes I'll mush both together based on how I want to express myself. Learning Urdu and then being placed in English-speaking schools, I think was a really challenging experience. I mean, for a number of reasons. I felt like it affected my identity quite a bit. I mean, even growing up, and I think that this is the experience for a lot of people who have either immigrated or who have parents who are immigrants. You feel like you don't belong in either world. You don't belong in this Western society, these types of groups, and you also feel this disconnect and lack of belonging within your own respective culture. I definitely had a lot of that experience growing up. I didn't realize this until later on in my life that I wasn't a verbal processor either. And so my sister was, and so I think that she was better able to speak quite a bit and practice quite a bit, whereas I was so internal. I process through my writing. To understand how I'm thinking or how I'm feeling, I kind of have to write it down, and that's how I'm better able to understand my own perspectives, my own emotions, my own experiences. It's something that I think has never come naturally to me, and why I've always felt a little bit on the outskirts for a lot of social situations, just because for the most part, I think people want your opinion on things, and it was never something that I could really articulate well through speaking, and it was a skill I had to very much learn and still learning how to do, which is funny that I'm on here. But even for these videos, I usually write some sort of an outline, a rough outline, and do a lot of that discovery work within jotting down my thoughts and reflections before I come on camera. And it's not often that I discover anything new while I'm speaking to, all of you. While I'm making these videos, I'm not really learning anything new or discovering anything new. I'm usually coming back with some thoughts and reflections that I've already made on paper and then can kind of relay them across in this way. And that's something that I've also found through having to public speak within my own job. And that is something that I was so outside my comfort zone, is still very much outside my comfort zone. I have to write out some sort of a script, a lot of reflections that I've already had, and then practice those quite extensively and feel prepared before going into those types of environments. Writing it originated as this space for me to just understand how I feel and how to process my emotions. The language piece, I think, really came in because the way that you express yourself in both Urdu and in English are very different. The weight of each language, it just shapes your identity and your experience quite differently. And I felt this huge disconnect in how when I spoke in English, I felt like a lot of times people weren't responding with the same amount of emotion that my dialect had. And that was really confusing because Urdu is a very poetic way of speaking. There's a lot of metaphors. There's a lot of emotion. I think it's a really common experience to experience different selves with different languages. And I really wanted to be able to bridge both versions of myself within both languages. I was so young that I was it's not like I had several years of Urdu in my backlog. I was speaking it and it was technically my first language, but the frequency at which I was expected to speak English started to outweigh how often I would be asked to speak Urdu, which was usually at home, but then I started speaking more and more English at home. A couple of ways that both of these languages are different. One that I already spoke about is that Urdu kind of expects a level of emotional literacy, whereas English, I would say, is more practical. It's very direct. It's a lot about naming things, whereas Urdu is a lot about about the feeling behind things, the emotional experience of everything is kind of woven into the language itself. Urdu just feels a lot softer in the way that you speak it. Like even in how are you, asking that in English is almost like a check-in. You can ask that without having any level of emotional weight. When you're meeting someone new, you're often like, hi, how are you doing? Like it's very casual, it's very nonchalant. It can have emotional weight to it, but it doesn't necessarily have to. It's almost woven into a greeting, a very informal greeting. In Urdu, when you're speaking it, there is that emotional weight. There's a level of concern that it naturally has when you're asking someone how they are. That, I think, carries just more connection to it than I think English does. Another piece is how in Urdu, you see places through emotion, whereas English, I think you often see them through function. Like you're usually like, your house is very cozy. Like that's a function of your home. Whereas in Urdu, oftentimes it's very common to be like, home provides peace. And that's a very common expression to kind of associate the two together. It's always through emotion rather than functionality of the space itself. There's also a lot more we. We is very much woven into the language as opposed to in English. You instinctively in English think about the individual over the other and over the sense of belonging and collectiveness. And I think that that's a distinction in a lot of languages in comparison to English. How you feel emotions is very different. Like even saying I love you is different in Urdu because even the words within it carry a level of devotion. The weight of devotion, patience, and endurance are naturally woven into the phrasing of I love you when you say it in Urdu versus when you say it in English. And then when you think about sadness, you're not thinking about sadness in isolation. It's not a solitary thing that is just happening to you. You're often saying like my heart is heavy rather than I am sad or I'm feeling sad. You're saying your heart is carrying that weight. And so the sadness actually belongs to your heart as opposed to your mind. And so your worldview of emotion is naturally located somewhere in your body and in your soul rather than just in your thoughts. Even like it's very common obviously in English to say that like I feel lonely, whereas in Urdu you'll often express yourself as like my world is closing in on me. Like there's a very poetic way of saying it, but also there's like this outwardly experience that is always woven into your individual experience as well. I did kind of name that Urdu expects this sort of emotional literacy. So when you say like my heart overflowed, you're not naming if it's like through love or nostalgia or sadness. It's kind of just understood. Whereas in English, it's a lot more about like naming the emotion and naming how you're feeling. There's also like memories are seen very differently within English and Urdu. Like for English, time is very linear. Like there is a past, and when you talk about the past, it is very much in the sense that that past is over. Whereas when you talk about memories and your past in Urdu, it's very much speaking as if you are walking back into that memory. Like time is not as linear within that language. It's kind of like an active recalling of that memory as if you are currently experiencing it or you can experience it again just by that nostalgia. Memory can feel so real and present. And that is a huge difference between English and Urdu as well. So when I was sort of understanding the world and learning English when I was quite young, it always carried all of these elements of what Urdu as a language is and the weight that it carries, but trying to bring it into the English speaking world, I think is a different experience and always felt like messy or disconnected. I didn't know how to do it properly, especially through speaking. And so I almost tried to bridge both of these worlds together through writing. And so a lot of times my writing is kind of a merging of both, like essences of both languages and what both of those languages embody together to better communicate a feeling or an experience or a scene or a character or a story. Those pieces, I think, have been really important for me just to also better understand myself, because I think I felt like in the middle of two different worlds and like a lack of belonging between both. Writing was really this place that held space for both of them, for all different versions of myself and all of the contrasting ways of how I needed to communicate to feel understood. It was a place that I could just make sense of what I was feeling and incorporate both elements of the language, because emotionality is so important to how I speak and how I communicate. And it's not always through very direct, very literal ways of speaking outside of like the professional world where I kind of have to do that. But especially within the creative realm, I think that is a space that can occupy both parts of me, and a space that I have found this sense of belonging that I had always sort of been searching for, which I'm just so grateful for. And that is the real connecting point that I try to remind myself every time I'm feeling very stuck or very disconnected with my writing, or feel like my relationship is strained with writing, or that I'm turning it into something that it's not, like something that is about more productivity or meeting XYZ goals that are external to me and outside of my control. All of those things, I think that coming home to this space is something that I always try to remind myself of, and something that I bring into all of the stories that I write as well. Language and the way that we understand the world, I think when we have these dualities of ourselves and our experiences and how we communicate in one space versus how we communicate in another space, I think we can feel like we're just these fragmented pieces that are so disconnected. And writing is a space that really has bridged that together for me and continues to. I kind of wanted to relay across some of that information, and I hope this was interesting to you. And I'm so curious, if you speak two languages, or you were born in another country, or if you have immigrant parents, I'm curious as to how those experiences help shape your writing. And I can go on and on about this, so this is more of like maybe even a part one of what is to come. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't commit to that, but we'll see. Because language has a huge role in our experiences and our identities, and how we show up in the world, and how we communicate to people, how we build relationships with one another. To be able to connect those, to find that space of belonging within my writing, I think is something that I feel really, really grateful for, and a practice that I hope to continue on forever. That's all I have for you all today, and I'll talk to you all very soon. Bye.